I cannot get away from conversations about AI, even if I don't say what I do. You'll be at the bar, someone will bring it up. You'll be at the club, someone will bring it up. You'll be at the coffee shop, someone will bring it up. No matter where you are, it's going to come up, even if I don't say I'm an AI reporter. So I think
one of the cool things or scary things about AI today is that a startup can become like a huge valuation startup with a small team in very little time right now. So you just have to get a sense of like which startups might do well.
It's been about 6 years since I started covering AI, so it's really changed a lot. But one thing that's always stayed the same is the story of power. As the industry changes, the top players have shifted a bit. But at the end of this day, it's still only a handful of people that are really controlling the broad swath of this industry. So
approaching everything with a skepticism sort of point of view is really important to covering any story, any company. And I think one of the key things there is really understanding the technology and asking, why do we even need it? Why do we need AI for this? And whose job is this replacing?
We feel like we're in a recession, right? Everyone kind of feels that, but we're being told that the economy is booming because so much money is being spent on AI infrastructure. And then you look into that and you're like, oh, well, it's all actually based on debt. And so you ask the question, are we in a bubble? What is going to happen?
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to have this conversation today. Thank you guys so much for joining. Incredibly excited that we've got 4 women up here talking about this at conferences. I mean, media ones tend to have more women, but conferences that I go to around AI, this is not the usual vibe. So I am going to really revel in that. I enjoy it very much. Okay, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and it's really about how we talk about AI to broader audiences who might not always understand it, even know what the term means, right? It's just so inherently broad, and there are so many different ways that you 3 all cover AI again. So what I was hoping is that each of you could quickly tell me if, this is the first time we're meeting, like how do you define, what is your beat? Tell me what it is you think or what you are reporting on. Maybe we'll just go down the line.
Sure thing. First off, thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be here. AI is truly a beast of a beat, and so our days usually look very different depending on what's on top of the news cycle. But largely and broadly at Forbes, we're really interested in covering the winners of AI, and so that means covering businesses that have real revenue, real impact, and are growing really fast. And so when we're deciding whether we cover a startup, we're usually asking them for hard business metrics like revenue and not ARR, real revenue, and valuations and things like that. And so that's really resulted in a bunch of deeper dives into companies like OpenEvidence, CoreWeave, Cognition, which are some of the largest AI companies right now. Apart from that, I'm really keen on telling the stories around how AI is impacting society and changing our lives, and as well as changing the online world.
Thank you. Rebecca.
Okay, so yeah, similarly, I'm very passionate about explaining to our readers how AI is impacting society, how it intersects with policy as well, and holding a lot of these players with a lot of power accountable for their actions, for the models they put out into the world. But of course, we're also TechCrunch, so we cover a lot of startups in the space. So really getting trends about sometimes really highly technical, kind of nitty-gritty insider baseball technology that is helping with the entire AI ecosystem, where the funding is, who's funding, what connections do they have, where did they work previously, the kind of staff departures across the larger companies, and how those alum often form their own startups. So yeah, kind of just a really broad, it's such a moving field that some days I'm like, oh, I'm really into AI companions. And then some days I'm diving deep into how AI helps with cancer research. So it's just, I guess, at TechCrunch we can kind of follow our nose.
Yeah, for me, I think it's been about 6 years since I started covering AI, so it's really changed a lot. But one thing that's always stayed the same is the story of power. That's the same for any industry, honestly, but especially in AI. The way I think about it is I cover the power dynamics and the societal implications of AI and kind of how that trickles down and trickles out. As the industry changes, the top players have shifted a bit. The infrastructure has become a lot more important, and they have become more powerful, those providers. But at the end of this day, it's still only a handful of people that are really controlling the broad swath of this industry. So holding those people accountable, shining a light on things the public should know, and just shining a light on how the industry works. And, like you said, the way that the money is flowing and where it's going, how these interpersonal dynamics also have affected the way the businesses have played out is very interesting. It's like, sometimes I feel like I'm covering a soap opera, but it's the AI industry. So yeah, I would just say the power dynamic, the societal implications, and how those things are affecting us every day as individuals.
6 years is like a lifetime in AI. I mean, it's almost hard to think about what your beat must have looked like when you started. Can you just give us a couple seconds on some of that evolution? And then I kind of want to take that part of the conversation and talk about how you all are finding sources. But I think that can kind of lead us, one can lead us to the other.
Yeah, how it looked about 6 years ago was, before generative AI, before ChatGPT, so it was a lot about algorithms and how they shape our everyday life. So mortgage algorithms and how they can be racist or sexist, or other like insurance algorithms, things like that, and a lot of science too. A lot of ways that algorithms are being used to determine, how we're treated for certain conditions. So it was a lot of industry-specific use cases, which was kind of a cool way to also learn how AI works, because there's no better way to learn what the technology really is and strip away the hype than to see how it's actually being used. I also did a lot of stories on like fraud algorithms at banks, so it could be glamorous or kind of not, but it definitely was industry-specific at the time.
Okay, let's talk about sources, but I do want to come back to the use cases, because I think that's a really important call out too. So as these companies, they're moving, they're evolving so quickly. Obviously there's these like crazy hiring wars and people are spending bazillions of dollars. How are you thinking about cultivating sources in this moment? How's the best way to build those relationships? Is it different at all than you think in other maybe tech subsectors? Like, what's unique about this moment in these companies from a reporting perspective?
I think a lot of people want to talk about AI. So I think in that sense, it's a little different. When it comes to sourcing, I would say like investors are really good sources. So when we are writing about a company, we're usually talking to a lot of people around the company who've like invested in them and have different point of views. Founders make for really great sources too, because obviously they want to talk about their company, and then later on they can provide a lot of really great insight and context to what's happening, and obviously reactions, because they're like really in the moment and in the middle of it all. And then apart from that, I think from time to time PR folks can be super helpful for us from a sourcing standpoint too. But just sort of really like meeting people in person and trying to speak their lingo and understand, why is AGI important to them? Why do they keep talking about AGI? And sort of trying to learn their lingo is really helpful to develop that sourcing in AI.
Yeah, I was going to say also founders are great. One of the cool things or scary things about AI today is that a startup can become a huge valuation startup with a small team in very little time right now. So getting in on the ground and talking to those like early seed stage startups, like when you kind of have like an idea of how a business is going to work, and sometimes that doesn't play out in the way that you think it will, right? You see Friend or Cluely and you think, oh, this isn't going to really work out, but the rage bait marketing has worked in their favor, right? So you just have to understand or get a sense of like which startups might do well. And then those can become huge companies, or they might be acquired by a larger company, or they might move on to another company. That's been a good tap for me. I also like talking to investors a lot, analysts, got those on speed dial, and engineers who are publishing papers in this space. Like, I have to learn about these things, right? So it's good to get someone on the phone to kind of walk me through their paper, their research, and hopefully can tap them as a source if there's a layoff or something like that in the future.
Yeah, I think for me, researchers are such a great way to source. not only are they so usually on the cutting edge of what's happening in AI, but oftentimes those research papers themselves will be big enough to become a story just on their own, especially with AI developing so quickly and a lot of concerns, being made public, whether it's like recursive self-improvement or, ways that AI systems are talking to each other and how that really looks. It's cool to see researchers, becoming forces in their own right just by publishing their research. So that's a big one for me. And then also, engineers at these companies, the people actually doing the real building, are one of my favorite categories of sources because they have things they're really excited about, they have things they're concerned about, and they move jobs a lot. So, depending on when you catch them, they may be more willing to talk than other times. And they also have a lot of context from other places they've worked. So those are my favorites. And then investors are also great because they can really take a wide bird's eye view of the industry, and a lot of times they've seen other industries play out in similar and different ways. So they can give you a lot of great context.
One thing a bunch of you brought up, either two or three of you said at the beginning, is that you like to cover the power dynamics, and I thought that was incredibly interesting. I want to spend a second on that. I've been working around tech and politics and policy for, almost 2 decades, but I don't want to tell everyone how old I am. But, the last time there was kind of a huge, I don't want to use the word bubble because that implies a lot of things, but the last time there was this much energy around startups, one of the criticisms of the media is that there wasn't really any, there wasn't much hard-hitting journalism about a lot of those startups. And I think in some ways, the pendulum has swung, sometimes I think too far the other way, but when you all think about the power dynamic and how you're trying to better understand how these companies play in society, I was just hoping you could spend a little bit of time talking about how you chase that down, and just kind of dig in a little bit around what that means to you as reporters and why it's important.
Yeah, that's absolutely really important. Approaching everything with a skepticism sort of point of view is really important to covering any story, any company. And I think one of the key things there is really understanding the technology and asking, why do we even need it? Some of the basic questions are why do we need AI for this? And whose job is this replacing? And sort of that point of view is really important to covering stories generally. There's just a lot of frenzy and movement happening. So one of the stories that I did recently was around how Meta has sort of lost its way with AI talent. We were sort of seeing a lot of headlines around Mark Zuckerberg, throwing millions of dollars to hire AI researchers, but we try to turn that around on its head and ask the question of why is it hiring? So why is Meta hiring so many researchers? And on the flip side of that, has it lost a lot of good AI talent because FAIR actually started within Meta? So that turned out to be a really good story, and we got to sort of see this from a more critical point of view.
I think there's a lot of ways to answer that question. Obviously there's from a consumer standpoint, there's people want to know what is going on, right? They love using ChatGPT, they love using Claude, if they know what it is. A lot of people don't, surprisingly, no one in this room, I hope. But I think that a lot of people are okay, so we feel like we're in a recession, right? Everyone kind of feels that, but we're being told that the economy is booming because AI infrastructure is, so much money is being spent on AI infrastructure, and then you look into that and you're oh, well, it's all actually based on debt. And so you ask the question, are we in a bubble? What is going to happen? And what do we get from this? We get companies that are promising, the way OpenAI describes AGI is to replace all economically viable work. So I think a lot of people probably in this room feel scared and worried about the consolidation of power and what it actually means for them in their day-to-days. So I kind of approach it that way, or think about that a lot. And then when you look also just at the industry I cover, which is startups, a lot of the time, it's, if you have all these larger companies, the incumbents are constantly acquiring either the company or just the founders, right? And it's what does that mean for the startup industry? And so, those are 2 ways that I will answer. I will pass it off to you.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and true that a lot of people are scared in a way that they haven't been in the past. When I was covering this 6 years ago, no one really knew what I did, and that was fine, you know? It was a work thing. My friends didn't really read my stories. It was no big deal. Now it comes up everywhere. I cannot get away from conversations about AI, even if I don't say what I do. You know, you'll be at the bar, someone will bring it up. You'll be at the club, someone will bring it up. You'll be at the coffee shop, someone will bring it up. No matter where you are, it's going to come up, even if I don't say I'm an AI reporter. So I think it's a really interesting touchstone right now. People are scared, they're concerned, they're worried about how AI is going to affect their own jobs and their own future, their own kids, their kids' educations. There's so many different areas of concern that people have, and a lot of people want to understand more how the technology works and who's in control of it, because you know, it just feels very out of control right now to a lot of people. And I think our job as journalists is to be you know, a sort of regulator in a way when there's not much regulation in the space right now. You know, obviously, you know, people are working on that, but right now it's not really a reality. So one of the best things we can do is shine a light on things going on in the industry, whether it's how things work, how the deals work, or how this is actually going to affect your everyday life just as an individual, you know, yeah.
I'm sorry, Rashi, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to add to that. There are a lot of people who are also getting very rich from AI and generating a lot of wealth. And so that creates more power. And so I think just coming back to the original question, it's even more important to ask these tough questions and hold them accountable.
I wanted to pull on the thread about regulation a little bit. Rebecca, you've written a good deal about regulation and innovation and how they can collide, how they can work together. I'm curious about how you see this moment. You know, Congress has obviously done nothing. Some of the states are active, New York is active, and how you kind of see this, I'd say, awkward dance, if you will, between regulators and the private sector, and how you report on that.
Yeah, I mean, as we've seen, states are kind of the only ones leading any kind of meaningful AI regulation, and you've got a lot of pushback from AI companies saying that we can't have a patchwork of regulation. It's going to be too hard for us, with our powerful AI models. It's going to be way too hard to figure out how to navigate it. And so a lot of them are trying to push for states to not be able to regulate AI in any way. And just to be clear, they're not regulating models. All of the legislation is super light touch. It's all about how to protect the consumer for the most part, right? And so, yeah, it is a weird dance where they have a lot of the cards. I think the AI companies do, because they've got backing from this administration, which is really mostly focused on growth. They whip out the AI, the race with China anytime there's any kind of, there's always a suggestion from them that any type of regulation is anathema to progress, which, you could argue one way or the other. But I think that they have, from what I understand, talking to California lawmakers, for example, there's a lot of close communications, a lot of talking, and a lot of trying to get the narrative back. And I find that that's also the role of the journalists, to try to explain the narrative fully and not let kind of, fear-mongering on either side really, disrupt the conversation and what the truth of it is.
I spend in my day job, I spend a lot of time on regulation and issues around regulation and AI. And one of the things that I always wish regulators and policymakers better understood is how the technology works. This is not an original thought. And I think that a lot of the bills we've seen try to regulate at the model level, but actually, we were talking about use cases before, and I think thinking about how AI works in practice. For instance, you might want to regulate something dealing with healthcare differently than e-commerce, different levels of protection for different uses. So that's how I would like to see the world, but let me turn that into a question. Rashi, I'm going to ask you this, because you often highlight in your work how AI is used. And like I said, I would love all the regulators to better understand what AI looks like in practice. Because right now, a lot of the conversation is up here, and that's good. We need to talk about what's happening up here, but a lot of times that is actually far removed from the facts on the ground. So what are I'm curious, some of the more interesting use cases, or even better, human stories that you've seen lately?
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. There are a lot of really interesting human stories that I think are this sort of hiding in the shadows almost. One of the stories that we did recently that was actually really interesting is around how older adults across the country are using AI companions and talking to them. And so for this story, I actually visited a senior care facility in the Bronx, and where some like 70 residents are using AI companions and speaking to these AI companions. And I spoke to this 84-year-old retired barber from New York who told me that he'd been talking to this AI companion for almost a year, and he'd shared some deeply personal information with it too, including like his sort of estranged relationship with his son. And so I think when we think about this technology and sort of who are the power users, we often think of like the 20-something nerds in San Francisco or something like that. But it's very fascinating to find that AI is actually being used by this demographic too. And obviously that also leads to questions around some sort of data privacy concerns, and whether there's like, if they've like formed some unhealthy attachment to these bonds, sort of what can some of the problematic concerns that can come from that.
It's really interesting. Hayden, well, first of all, like I said before, I'm fascinated, 6 years, to think about how the AI kind of industry, if you will, has changed. So I want to ask you a little bit, well, for the Verge audience, it's a really tech-savvy audience. It's a healthy dose of skepticism among your readership, I would say. And I'm interested, both given that fact and given that you've been on the beat now for 6 years is a long time in AI, not a long time in the grand scheme of things, about how you think of keeping it fresh. Like, what still surprises you? How do you make sure your readers want to read the stories? I've spoken actually with some other people from The Verge about this before too, like the stories that are medicine versus what you think they should read versus what they want to read, and how you parse that out.
Totally, yeah, that's a great question. I think that a lot of the time, the things that I think people should read right now in AI are things that they do want to read because of those concerns. People are so hungry for information, and I don't think it was always that way. I think 6 years ago or 5 years ago, 4 years ago, even the first year of ChatGPT being around, I had to kind of separate into two categories: what people should know versus what they want to know. What they wanted to know was more like palace intrigue stuff, big funding amounts, huge deals, crazy dystopian stuff that was coming out of the woodwork. But what they should know at the time was like, how it worked, who was in charge, things like that. And of course the dystopian stuff too. But I think now it's really one and the same, in that people are so hungry for information. They want to know how this technology works. They want to know how it's going to affect their future, and why there isn't a lot of regulation, and why certain states are handling it differently than other states. They want to know why their friend is paying $200 a month for a subscription to ChatGPT. They want to know why their mom is using a companion chatbot so much. They have so many questions, and I feel like it's the first time that I feel like I'm not providing answers at a fast enough rate, because people are thinking about this so often during the day. So yeah, I think that's really what's changed. It's that the overlap the Venn diagram has just become one big circle, and that everyone wants to know as much as they can about who's in charge of these systems. And the fact that it's a handful of mostly white men around the same age, all in charge of kind of the way this stuff is coming out, hasn't escaped many people, So I think that's important. And then as for The Verge, I think, yeah, our audience is so informed and so hungry for information in a way that they don't want anything to be whitewashed. They really want to know, the nitty gritty and the underbelly of the industry. So it's, lends itself well to investigative stuff, as well as just, reporting on the soap opera that is the AI industry every day.
Well, we ran over. I'm really sorry for who's ever running the schedule. And I wanted to thank you all so much, because as all these changes keep happening, we will be sure to read all the smart things you guys have to say about it. Thank you so much.